and she addressed Stephanie White telling her she's the #1 option, she's the priority of the team. Basically, Stephanie White is telling Kelsey Mitchell it's her team. It's your team, Kelsey.
What kind of rookie turns down $60 million? That's the question swirling around Shedeur Sanders after reports surfaced that he walked away from a massive offer from Gatorade. For most athletes, especially someone just entering the league, that's life-changing money. You sign it, you celebrate, you don't blink. But according to the buzz online, Shedeur did blink, and then he asked for something different. Instead of guaranteed cash, rumors suggest he pushed for ownership, not just a check, a stake. If true, that would be a bold move no rookie has ever publicly pulled off at this level. Now, it's important to say, much of this is based on circulating reports and speculation. No official documentation has confirmed the exact terms, but whether every detail is accurate or not, the conversation itself reveals something bigger. This isn't just about money. It's about leverage. Here where things get wild. Over the past few weeks, social media has been flooded with claims that Shedeur Sanders didn't just negotiate a normal endorsement deal with Gatorade. He allegedly asked for equity instead of guaranteed cash. Some posts even suggest he pushed for a 3% ownership stake in Gatorade's US operations. Let that sink in, not a bonus, not a royalty bump, ownership. Now, to be clear, there is no official confirmation of those exact numbers. These details are coming from online reports, fan discussions, and viral sports commentary. But the rumor alone has people talking for a reason. If a rookie quarterback truly negotiated equity in a global beverage brand, that would be historic. Companies like Gatorade generate billions in annual revenue. Even a small percentage, if structured in real equity, could be worth far more long-term than a short-term $60 million payout. And that's the part that has the business world buzzing. Because equity changes everything. Cash is finite, it gets taxed, it gets spent, it fluctuates, but ownership grows with the company, every new product launch, every international expansion, every year of compounding revenue. That's why even the idea of this negotiation has shaken the traditional endorsement model. For decades, athletes signed endorsement deals structured around fixed payments. The brand wins long-term, the athlete gets paid now, that's been the formula. Rarely does a company give true equity, especially to someone who hasn't even fully established themselves at the professional level. Which is why so many analysts are skeptical. Some insiders have quietly questioned whether the 3% stake claim is realistic at face value. Others believe the structure could be performance-based incentives or long-term royalty escalators rather than direct ownership. And that distinction matters. But here's what's undeniable. Shedeur's camp appears to be negotiating from a position of leverage, not desperation. And that's unusual for a rookie. The conversation has shifted from "is he worth the deal" to "how is he structuring the deal?" That's a completely different narrative. And it aligns with the broader shift we're seeing in modern athlete branding. Name, image, and likeness deals in college changed the power dynamic. Athletes now enter the league understanding their value before signing their first professional contract. They build audiences early, they understand marketing, they think like entrepreneurs. So even if the exact 3% figure isn't officially verified, the philosophy behind it feels very real. Demand ownership, demand upside, don't just rent your image, invest it. That mindset alone is disruptive. Because once one athlete starts pushing for equity, others start asking their agents why they aren't doing the same. Brands suddenly face a new reality. Top-tier talent may not settle for cash-only deals anymore. And whether the Gatorade percentage rumor turns out to be precisely accurate or slightly exaggerated, the bigger point remains intact. The negotiation conversation around Shedeur Sanders isn't traditional. And that might be the most revolutionary part of the story. Before Shedeur Sanders even took an official NFL snap, the internet was already buzzing about his alleged deal with Nike. According to circulating reports, the original contract was already massive, rumored to be around $125 million. For a rookie, that number alone would be historic. But what really caught attention was what insiders claim was built into the structure: an active player clause. The story goes like this: the moment Shedeur stepped onto the field for his first NFL action, the contract value escalated. Some reports even claim it doubled. Now again, these figures haven't been officially verified, but the concept behind them is what matters. Performance-triggered leverage. Instead of a flat endorsement check, the structure allegedly rewarded visibility and on-field activation. In other words, Nike wasn't just paying for potential, they were tying value directly to his presence in the league. That's strategic on both sides. And then came the jersey sales talk. Online commentators claim Shedeur negotiated an unusually high percentage of his jersey revenue, far above the standard league split most players receive. Now, it's important to understand that NFL merchandise revenue is governed by collective bargaining agreements, which makes a 50% personal cut extremely unlikely under normal league rules. But even if the exact percentage is exaggerated, the larger narrative still stands. His team appears focused on maximizing upside. That's the difference. Most rookies are thrilled just to secure a brand partnership. Shedeur's camp seems to be negotiating terms that scale with performance, visibility, and demand. That signals confidence, not just in his talent but in his market value. And here why that matters. Brand contracts usually favor the company long-term. They lock athletes into fixed payments while the brand reaps the growing exposure. By including escalators, incentives, and potentially revenue-sharing components, the athlete flips that dynamic. It's not just pay me now. It's grow with me. That approach aligns with the broader business philosophy we've seen surrounding Shedeur. Leverage early attention, capitalize on brand strength, tie compensation to growth instead of settling for static numbers. Even the viral jersey sales narrative plays into this strategy. Reports claim he became one of the best-selling rookie jerseys before even playing a regular season game. While exact revenue figures vary depending on the source, the visibility was undeniable. Hype translates to demand. Demand translates to negotiation power. And negotiation power is everything. Because once brands see measurable traction, pre-snap sales, viral moments, audience engagement, the athlete stops being a gamble and starts being an asset. Whether the contract doubled exactly as rumored or simply included strong escalators. One thing is clear: the deal structure itself is part of the story. It signals foresight. It signals planning. It signals a rookie who isn't just signing, he's strategizing. And when you combine performance-triggered incentives with equity discussions, you start to see a pattern emerging. This isn't about chasing headlines. It's about engineering leverage before the first whistle ever blows. None of this makes sense unless you understand one thing: this didn't start with Shedeur. It started with Deion Sanders. For decades, Deion watched how professional sports really worked. He saw brands profit off athletes' images. He saw endorsement deals structured in ways that favored corporations long after players' careers ended. And he learned, sometimes the hard way, how ownership and control shape long-term wealth. That experience became a blueprint. What people online are calling the prime equity philosophy isn't a formally recognized NFL contract clause. It's more of a mindset, a strategy, the idea that athletes shouldn't just participate in brand growth, they should own part of it. And Deion has been vocal about that shift. Through the nil era in college football, he encouraged players to think beyond checks. Build your brand, protect your image rights, understand leverage, don't sign just because the number looks big, ask what happens 5 years later. That philosophy appears to be shaping Shedeur Sanders' approach now. Reports suggest Shedeur maintains strong control over his image rights and endorsement negotiations. While exact contractual language isn't public, it's clear his camp prioritizes autonomy. That means carefully structured partnerships. That means fewer middlemen. That means understanding how league agreements interact with personal branding. And that's rare for a rookie. Most players enter the league focused solely on football performance. Business decisions often come later, but Shedeur grew up inside the machine. He saw how deals are built. He saw how leverage shifts once performance proves itself. That awareness changes everything. It also explains why some critics initially labeled him entitled. During draft season, there was chatter that he carried himself with too much confidence, that he expected too much control, that he wasn't fitting the traditional mold. But confidence and entitlement often look identical until results show up. If the reports about equity negotiations, performance-triggered contracts, and ownership-style structures are even partially accurate, then what critics called arrogance might simply be preparation. Preparation shaped by Dayan's career lessons. Think about it, Dayan played in multiple sports, built one of the strongest personal brands of his era, and transitioned into coaching with massive media presence. He understands the economics behind sports fame. And that knowledge transfers. The prime equity mindset isn't about rejecting endorsements. It's about restructuring them. Instead of renting your image for 3 years, negotiate upside. Instead of accepting flat fees, look for escalators. Instead of surrendering rights, retain control where possible. That's long-term thinking. It also represents a generational shift. Nil opened doors for athletes to monetize themselves before turning pro. Shedeur didn't enter the NFL as a blank slate. He entered as a developed brand with an audience, market awareness, and business infrastructure. That's a different starting point than most rookies historically had. And when you combine that with a father who understands both athletic dominance and corporate leverage, the result is something unconventional. Maybe even disruptive. Whether every viral claim about equity percentages is fully accurate or slightly exaggerated, one thing feels undeniable. This isn't accidental. This is philosophy in action. And it's rewriting how young athletes approach power. For decades, the endorsement model followed one simple formula. The brand paid, the athlete performed, the company owned the long-term upside. It worked beautifully for corporations. Athletes signed deals that looked massive in the moment, but once the contract ended, the brand continued printing money off the association. Meanwhile, the player moved on to the next check. No ownership, no compounding equity, just a transactional relationship. That was the old system. And it created generational wealth, just rarely for the athlete. Even legends like Michael Jordan built enormous value for brands early in their careers before equity-style structures became normalized. It wasn't until much later that athlete equity models evolved into something more sophisticated. But the nil changed everything. When college athletes were finally allowed to profit from their name, image, and likeness, the power dynamic shifted overnight. Players started thinking like brands before they ever turned pro. They hired marketing teams, they negotiated partnerships, they learned contract language, they built audiences. By the time someone like Shedeur Sanders entered the NFL, he wasn't just a prospect. He was already a business entity. That's the real disruption. Under the old system, rookies were grateful. They took what was offered because they had no leverage. Draft position determined market value, first-round picks commanded endorsements, late-round picks waited their turn. But Nil flipped the timeline. Now, a player can build millions in brand value before ever signing a professional contract. Social media following matters, personal brand matters, marketability matters. Suddenly, draft slot isn't the only metric that determines negotiating power. That's why the conversations around Shedeur's alleged equity negotiations feel different. Whether every reported percentage is accurate or not, the fact that a rookie is even in that conversation signals change. Because he doesn't need to negotiate from desperation. He negotiates from visibility. And visibility equals leverage. The old model relied on information imbalance. Brands understood contract structures, athletes often didn't. Agents handled most details quietly, players focused on performance. But this generation studies the game behind the game. They understand royalties, they understand escalation clauses, they understand long-term brand positioning. They've watched older athletes miss out on ownership opportunities and learned from it. That's power. And it's making traditional sports executives uncomfortable. Because once athletes begin demanding equity instead of flat fees, the economics shift. Brands can't simply pay once and benefit forever. They must share upside, they must justify terms, they must compete structurally, not just financially. That's a market correction. And Shedeur's rumored approach fits perfectly within that new era mentality. It's not about rejecting endorsements. It's about redesigning them. Instead of "how much are you paying me?" it becomes, How much of this are we building together? That's a completely different negotiation. And whether or not every viral claim holds up under scrutiny, one thing is clear: the nil generation enters the league thinking differently. They're not waiting until retirement to think about ownership. They're starting with it. That's the power shift. And it's only getting started. Here where the narrative gets interesting. Before Shedeur Sanders ever negotiated viral endorsement terms, he was being criticized during the draft process, not for lack of talent, not for poor performance, but for something far more subjective: his confidence. There were analysts who suggested he came off as too polished, too aware of his brand, too comfortable in interviews. Some even used the word entitled. The idea floating around certain media circles was that he expected star treatment before earning it at the professional level. But here's the question no one asked at the time. What if that wasn't entitlement? What if it was preparation? Shedeur didn't grow up in a typical football household. He grew up watching Deion Sanders navigate fame, contracts, endorsements, and media narratives at the highest level. He understood early that talent alone doesn't determine value, perception does, leverage does, negotiation does. So when he entered draft season speaking confidently about his worth, it clashed with the traditional rookie script. Historically, prospects are expected to sound grateful, humble, quiet, anything beyond that sometimes gets framed negatively. But in business, confidence is currency. And that's where the interpretation splits. Critics saw a young player demanding too much too soon. Supporters saw a brand-aware athlete refusing to undervalue himself. The same behavior, two completely different readings. Now fast forward. The same confidence that was labeled arrogance is now being discussed as strategic leverage. The same self-belief that drew skepticism is now being framed as business acumen. That's how quickly perception shifts once numbers and deals start circulating. It's also worth noting that draft position often shapes narrative unfairly. If a first-round pick speaks boldly, it's called leadership. If a later-round pick does it, it can be framed as unrealistic expectations. The draft slot doesn't always reflect market value. Shedeur entered the league with a massive social media following, nil experience, and brand recognition far beyond many players selected ahead of him. That changes negotiation dynamics. It changes endorsement conversations. It changes leverage. Yet the draft narrative initially ignored that layer. Instead, the focus centered on attitude. And that's a pattern we've seen before in sports. Confident young athletes often get labeled negatively until their strategy pays off. Then the same traits get rebranded as visionary. So was Shedeur entitled? Or was he simply operating with long-term awareness in a system that traditionally favors short-term gratitude? The truth likely sits somewhere more nuanced. Confidence can absolutely be misread, but so can strategic patience. What's clear is this: the criticism didn't slow him down. It didn't shrink his negotiation posture. If anything, it may have reinforced his approach. Because when you know your value, outside opinions become background noise. And now, as endorsement structures and equity conversations continue to circulate, that early draft criticism feels less like a warning sign and more like a preview of what was coming. Sometimes the traits people question first are the same traits that separate athletes later. The draft narrative framed it as ego. Time might frame it as strategy. Now here's the headline that's really lighting social media on fire. Some commentators are already asking whether Shedeur Sanders could become the youngest billionaire in NFL history while still playing. That's a massive claim. And let's be clear, right now that idea lives in the realm of speculation. There's no verified financial disclosure showing Shedeur anywhere near billionaire status today. But what people are reacting to isn't his current net worth, it's his trajectory. Because trajectory changes perception. When reports circulate about equity negotiations, escalator-heavy contracts, brand ownership, and performance-triggered deals, the math starts looking different. Traditional rookie earnings are linear. Salary plus endorsements equals income. But ownership introduces exponential potential. And that's an important if an athlete secures real equity in growing companies, the upside isn't capped by contract length. It compounds, it scales, it appreciates over time. That's how modern athlete billionaires are built. Look at players like LeBron James. His billionaire status didn't come purely from NBA salary. It came from long-term equity positions, brand ownership, and smart investments layered over years. It wasn't instant, it was strategic. The same goes for Tiger Woods and others who built wealth through diversified holdings, not just paychecks. So when people talk about Shedeur in that conversation, they're not saying he's there today. They're asking whether he's positioning himself early. And that's where the distinction between rich and wealthy matters. Rich is high income. Wealthy is asset ownership. A rookie quarterback can become rich quickly through signing bonuses and endorsement checks. But wealth, generational, compounding wealth, comes from equity, stakes, and scalable investments. That's the core of the viral narrative. If Shedeur's reported approach focuses on upside participation instead of fixed payouts, then over 10, 15, or 20 years, those decisions could compound dramatically, especially if his on-field performance increases his market leverage even further. But there's another side to this. Equity is risk. Cash is guaranteed, ownership fluctuates, companies grow, but they can also stall, markets change, consumer trends shift, performance impacts brand alignment. There are no guarantees in long-term investment strategy. So the billionaire talk is bold, it's attention-grabbing, it fuels headlines. But it's not automatic. What's more realistic is this. If Shedeur continues stacking high-leverage deals, protecting image rights, and thinking in decades instead of seasons, he dramatically increases the probability of long-term financial dominance. That's not hype. That's math. And even if billionaire status remains a distant possibility rather than an immediate reality, the bigger story isn't about crossing a specific dollar threshold. It's about shifting the ceiling. Most rookies enter the league thinking about their second contract. Shedeur appears to be thinking about asset portfolios. That mindset alone separates timelines. So is the billionaire talk premature? Yes, in terms of confirmed numbers. But is the trajectory conversation legitimate? Absolutely. Because when an athlete starts prioritizing ownership before even establishing a full professional resume, the financial blueprint changes. And sometimes, trajectory matters more than today's headline figure. Here, where this story gets bigger than one quarterback. If even half of the reported structures around Shedeur Sanders are accurate, equity conversations, performance escalators, image control, then this isn't just a personal win. It's a market signal. Because the moment one high-profile athlete negotiates differently, every other young player starts asking questions. Why am I signing flat deals? Why am I not asking for upside? Why am I giving away long-term value for short-term cash? And agents feel that pressure immediately. The nil era already forced representation to evolve. Athletes now enter the league with brand awareness, media training, and social leverage. But if Shedeur's rumored approach gains traction, the next evolution won't just be bigger endorsement checks. It will be ownership demands. That's uncomfortable for brands. For decades, corporations structured deals in ways that protected their long-term advantage. Athletes were compensated handsomely upfront, but rarely participated in exponential growth. Equity was reserved for global icons deep into their careers, not rookies. But leverage doesn't care about tradition. If a player brings audience, engagement, and measurable consumer demand, brands may have to compete structurally, not just financially. And here's the twist: this shift doesn't require every athlete to secure massive equity stakes. It only requires a few visible cases to change negotiation expectations. Markets respond to precedent. If Shedeur, as a young quarterback, successfully negotiates escalator-heavy or ownership-based models, other rising athletes will attempt similar frameworks. Agents will start including optional equity language. Brands will face tougher conversations in boardrooms. Do we offer ownership? Do we risk losing the athlete? Do we redesign compensation models? That's how industries shift. Look at what happened in tech when employees began demanding stock options instead of just salary. Suddenly, compensation wasn't about paychecks, it was about participation. sports endorsements could be heading toward a similar recalibration. But there's another layer. This also shifts power away from draft position. Historically, first-round picks dominated endorsement value. Late-round selections waited for performance to prove worth. But if personal brand and leverage matter more than draft slot, that hierarchy softens. Shedeur's situation, as someone who entered the league with significant visibility regardless of draft position, challenges the traditional valuation model. That forces brands to evaluate influence differently. Not just stats, not just draft rank, but audience engagement, digital footprint, cultural relevance. And that's the future of athlete marketing. Now, does this mean every rookie will suddenly get equity offers? No, leverage still depends on demand, performance still matters, visibility still drives negotiation strength. But the ceiling changes once the precedent exists. If Shedeur's approach becomes even partially normalized, the next generation of athletes won't walk into endorsement meetings asking, "What's the check?" They'll ask, "What's the upside?" That's a psychological shift. And psychological shifts reshape industries faster than policy ever could. So while this story began with one rumored $60 million decision, its ripple effects could extend far beyond one contract. Because once athletes realize they have more negotiating power than they were told, the entire endorsement ecosystem has to adapt. And that adaptation may just be getting started. Strip away the headlines, ignore the viral numbers for a second, because this was never really about $60 million. It was about leverage. When reports surfaced that Shedeur Sanders turned down a massive guaranteed offer from Gatorade, the internet reacted to the dollar figure. That's natural. $60 million sounds life-changing. It sounds impossible to walk away from. But the deeper conversation isn't about the check. It's about control. Whether the rumored equity percentage is exactly accurate or slightly exaggerated, the mindset behind it is what matters. Instead of asking, "How much will you pay me?" the negotiation reportedly shifted to, "How do I participate in what we're building?" That's a completely different posture. And posture changes outcomes. For decades, athletes were taught to secure the biggest guaranteed deal possible. Lock in the money, protect against injury, take certainty over risk. That logic makes sense, especially in a sport as physical as football. But the new generation is thinking differently. Ownership compounds. Cash depreciates. If you believe in your brand, your growth, your long-term visibility, then equity, even structured upside, becomes more attractive than a one-time payout. It's not about rejecting money, it's about choosing multiplication over addition. And that's where this story shifts from shocking to strategic. Shedeur didn't enter the league naive about business. He grew up watching Deion Sanders navigate contracts, endorsements, and branding at the highest level. He saw firsthand how companies profit from athlete associations long after the player retires. So if he's now prioritizing leverage, that's not rebellion. That's preparation. Of course, equity carries risk. Companies can plateau, markets fluctuate, performance impacts value, nothing is guaranteed, and that's why the choice feels bold. Turning down guaranteed money for upside requires belief not just in the company but in yourself. And that's the real headline. Belief. Belief that your brand will grow, belief that your performance will sustain visibility, belief that long-term ownership will outweigh short-term security. That mindset separates players who get paid from players who build portfolios. But here's the biggest takeaway. Even if the exact financial details evolve over time, even if some viral numbers turn out to be inflated, the shift in conversation has already happened. Rookies are now being discussed in terms of equity. Ownership is part of the narrative. Leverage is part of the evaluation. That alone signals change. So no, this isn't about $60 million. It's about rewriting the negotiation script. It's about challenging the old model that said athletes should be grateful for whatever offered. And it's about proving that sometimes the smartest financial move isn't the biggest immediate number, it's the one that builds beyond the contract. Now the question becomes yours. If you were offered guaranteed millions today, would you take the cash? Or would you bet on ownership?